there is a house on Ashworth Lane that nobody talks about. Not because it is unremarkable, because every single person who has ever lived in it has disappeared. 14 Ashworth Lane. A Victorian house, 3 floors, 7 bedrooms, a basement that runs deeper than any blueprint shows. Built in 1891. Stone facade darkened by decades of city rain. Bay windows that catch the afternoon light and hold it longer than the surrounding buildings, as if the house absorbs things and refuses to let them go. In 30 years, 7 families had moved in. 7 families had vanished, not died, not moved away quietly, not left forwarding addresses. Vanished. The first, the Harmon family, 1994. Mother, father, 2 children. Here on a Monday, gone by Friday, car still in the driveway. Dinner half-eaten on the table. School bags by the front door. The second, a retired professor named Arthur Wells. 1998, found his belongings 6 months after his disappearance in a storage unit he had never rented. His handwriting on the rental form. His signature wrong in a way nobody could explain. The third, fourth, fifth, variations of the same story. People who moved in full of plans and left nothing behind except the questions they never got to answer. The sixth, a young couple named the Brennans. 2019, they lasted 11 days. Their neighbor reported hearing sounds from the house at 3 a.m. Not voices, not movement, just sounds she described as the house breathing. The Brennans were gone by morning. Their cat was found sitting on the front step 3 days later. It refused to go back inside. The seventh, a property developer named Simon Chase. 2021. He lasted 4 days, found wandering 6 miles from the house with no memory of leaving and no explanation for the 3 days he couldn't account for. He was the only one who came back, and he never spoke about what he had seen inside. Daniel Cross was the 8th owner. He had bought the house knowing its history, had dismissed every disappearance as coincidence or exaggeration, had told his friends he was getting a Victorian 3-story for 40% below market value, and that ghost stories were for people who hadn't read enough history. He moved in on a Tuesday. He called Ryan Cole's direct line at 2 a.m. on a Thursday morning. "Something is in this house," he said. His voice was completely level, not panicked, not hysterical. The specific flatness of someone who has moved past fear into something quieter and more dangerous. "What kind of something?" Ryan asked. "The kind that makes you understand why nobody stays." The line went dead. By the time Ryan and Mysteria arrived at 14 Ashworth Lane, Daniel Cross was gone. The 8th disappearance, and the front door was open, as if something was waiting for them to come inside. Mysteria stood at the threshold of 14 Ashworth Lane and did not go in immediately. She looked at the open door for 11 seconds. Ryan stood beside her. "You're not going in," he said. "I'm looking," she said. "What are you looking for?" Whether the door was opened from inside or outside. She crouched at the door frame, the latch mechanism, the handle, the way the door sat in its frame. "Opened from inside," she said, "and left open deliberately. Someone wanted us to enter." "There is always someone," she said. She walked in. The house was cold in the specific way that old houses are cold when the temperature has been held by stone and age rather than any heating system. The cold of air that hasn't moved properly in a very long time. The hallway was wide. Original Victorian tiles, black and white, cracked in places, worn smooth in the center by decades of footsteps. A staircase rising to the upper floors. Doors leading off to either side. Daniel Cross's belongings, a coat on the hook, boots by the door, a half-finished cup of tea on the hallway table, still faintly warm, suggested a man who had been here minutes ago, not hours. minutes. He was here when he called, Mysteria said. He hung up and disappeared in under 40 minutes. How? She looked at the hallway, the tiles, the staircase, the doors. That, she said quietly, is what this house has been hiding for 30 years. They searched systematically. Ground floor first. Every room, the drawing room, Daniel's books half unpacked from a box beside the fireplace, his reading glasses on the arm of the chair. The kitchen, clean, a single plate and cup drying beside the sink. The dining room, empty except for a table and 2 chairs. And on the table, a notebook. Not Daniel's. The handwriting inside was different. Older. The ink faded to a pale brown, suggesting decades rather than years. Mysteria picked it up carefully. The first page, a date, 1992. The entries were systematic, methodical, the handwriting of someone who documented everything with precision, times, measurements, access points, observations. She read the first entry. Day 1 of construction. Passage behind dining room wall complete. Joins to staircase cavity as planned. No visible seam from interior. Owner will never know. She looked up. Ryan, she said, get forensics here, now. What is it? She held up the notebook. Someone built secret passages into this house during the original renovation 30 years ago and has been using them ever since. Ryan stared at her. Start knocking, she said. On what? The walls, she said. All of them. It took 30 minutes to find the first panel. A section of the dining room wall fitted so precisely into the Victorian plasterwork it was invisible unless you knew what you were looking for. A seam so fine it looked like a natural crack in the old surface. It opened inward. Behind it, a narrow passage, running parallel to the wall before turning and disappearing into the interior of the house. Ryan shone his torch in. The passage was not empty. A folding chair, a battery-powered lamp, a shelf of tinned food, a sleeping mat rolled neatly against one wall, a water container, notebooks identical to the one from the dining room table, dozens of them, stacked and labeled by year going back 3 decades. And on the wall of the passage, a series of small holes, each one no bigger than a coin, each one positioned at a precisely different height and angle. Peepholes into every room on the ground floor. Mysteria looked at the chair positioned in front of them. He watches, Ryan said quietly. From in here. Has been watching, she said, for 3 years. She picked up the earliest notebook.
1992. Construction notes, detailed, precise. The work of a professional who knew exactly what he was building and why. She turned to the most recent entry, written 2 nights ago, day 1089. New owner, younger, more observant than the others. Standard methods may not be sufficient. We'll need to escalate. The vault must stay hidden. She closed the notebook. He's still here, she said. Ryan's hand moved toward his radio. Not yet, Mysteria said quietly. We need to find where the passages lead first. She stepped into the passage. Ryan followed. The passage system ran through the entire house, behind the dining room, inside the cavity of the staircase, along the length of the first floor landing, through the roof space above the 3rd floor bedrooms. A network built during the 1992 renovation by someone who had intimate knowledge of Victorian construction and the patience to build invisible infrastructure into every floor of a 3-story house without leaving a single visible trace. All of it converged on one point: the basement. Not the basement that appeared on the plans, shallow, functional, accessible through the kitchen door. A second basement, deeper, older, accessible only through a concealed hatch at the back of the passage network, requiring knowledge of which specific stone to press to release the mechanism. Mysteria found it because the notebooks had described it. The hatch opened onto a stone staircase. At the bottom, a room. And in the room, Daniel Cross, sitting against the far wall, conscious, unharmed, hands zip-tied in front of him, eyes wide but steady, and beside him, 6 other people, the Brennans, Arthur Wells, Simon Chase, 3 others. Not all the previous owners had simply fled. Some had stayed too long, asked too many questions, noticed too many things, and been brought here, kept alive, fed, watered, in the dark. In the center of the room, a vault, steel, modern, completely out of place in the Victorian stone space around it. And in front of the vault, a man, 70s, lean, white-haired, dressed in clothes that were clean but old, the wardrobe of someone who rarely left a building. He looked at Mysteria when she came down the stairs, not surprised, relieved. "I wondered when someone would actually look," he said. His name was Edmund Reeves. In 1992, 32 years ago, Edmund was a building contractor hired to renovate 14 Ashworth Lane following the death of its previous owner, a man named Gerald Marsh, who had died with no family and no will. During the renovation, Edmund had broken through a section of the original foundation wall in the basement. Behind it, a vault. Gerald Marsh had spent 40 years as a private secretary to a succession of powerful people across the city's financial and political institutions. A quiet man, an invisible man. The kind of man that powerful people spoke freely in front of because they forgot he was there. He had documented everything, every private conversation, every financial irregularity, every decision made behind closed doors that was never meant to be recorded. 40 years of secrets belonging to some of the most powerful institutions and individuals in the city. All of it sitting in a vault beneath a house nobody knew contained anything of value. Edmund had recognized immediately what he had found. He had told nobody. He had finished the renovation, building his passage network into the house as he went, knowing he would need access to the vault without arousing suspicion. He had installed a concealed exterior access point into the foundation that allowed him to visit the vault quietly for years without ever entering the house itself. For 7 years, it had worked perfectly. Then in 1999, the house's then current owner had commissioned a security upgrade that sealed Edmund's exterior access completely. And Edmund had done the only thing he could think of. He had moved into the passages he had built. 3 years, Mysteria said. "You have been living in those walls for 3 years." "Yes," Edmund said, "and before that, visiting the vault from outside for 29 years." "Yes." "You built the passages knowing one day you might need them." "I built them hoping I never would," he said quietly. "And then I needed them." Ryan looked at the 7 people along the wall. "And them?" Edmund looked at Daniel Cross, at the Brennans, at Arthur Wells. "The ones who simply fled I frightened away, sounds in the walls, shadows, cold air through passage gaps, enough to make the house feel wrong without causing anyone harm. And the ones who didn't flee? The ones who stayed too long, who started looking too closely." He paused. "I couldn't let them leave, not until I had finished what I needed to finish. I was almost done." "Done with what?" Ryan asked. Edmund looked at the vault. "Selling the last of it," he said. "Gerald Marsh spent 40 years collecting these documents. I have spent 32 years selling them carefully, piece by piece, to the right people at the right price." "How much?" Mysteria asked. Edmund was quiet for a moment. "Enough," he said, "that I never needed to leave." Mysteria looked at him steadily. "You left the notebook on the table," she said. "You left the front door open." He met her eyes. "I am 73 years old," he said. "I have lived in those passages for 3 years, in the dark, listening to other people live their lives through holes in the wall." A long silence. "I left the notebook because I wanted someone to find it," he said. "I left the door open because I wanted someone to come in." He looked at his hands. "I wanted it to be over." Edmund Reeves was arrested. The vault was opened under court order 4 days later. What was inside occupied 3 separate investigative teams for the following 9 months, Financial records, private communications, and classified documentation spanning 4 decades and implicating individuals and institutions that had considered themselves completely untouchable. The 7 people found in the basement, Daniel Cross, the Brennans, Arthur Wells, Simon Chase, and 2 others whose families had given up searching, were taken to hospital, all physically unharmed, all recovered. The families who had simply fled were located and informed. They had never spoken publicly about what they had experienced inside 14 Ashworth Lane. They had simply left and locked the memory away. They cried when they were told it was over, not from sadness, from the specific relief of finally understanding something that had made no sense for 30 years. Mysteria and Ryan stood outside 14 Ashworth Lane on the morning after the arrest. The house looked completely ordinary in daylight, just stone, windows, a front door sealed with official tape. 32 years, Ryan said quietly, building passages into a house so he could sell someone else's secrets. 29 of those years from the outside, Mysteria said, only the last 3 inside. Still, she agreed. Ryan looked at the bay windows catching the morning light. The families who fled, they thought it was haunted. Cold air through passage gaps, Mysteria said. Sounds in the walls, shadows through peepholes. He knew exactly which details would be most effective for each family. He had read them through those holes for weeks before he started. That is the most frightening part, Ryan said. Not that he was there, that he knew them well enough to know exactly what would scare them most. Mysteria looked at the house. Edmund Reeves spent 32 years making people believe in something impossible, she said. Because the truth, a man living in the walls of a house selling secrets, was so much stranger than any ghost story that nobody would have believed it even if they had guessed it. She picked up her coffee. The most effective hiding place, she said, is always the one that sounds like fiction. She turned away from the house and walked toward the car. Ryan took one last look at the bay windows, then followed. 7 families, 3 decades, 1 man living in the walls of a house he had renovated 32 years ago, watching through holes in the plaster, selling secrets from a vault nobody knew existed, and frightening away everyone who came too close. He was never a ghost. He was something far more unsettling. He was patient, and he was there the whole time. Agent Mysteria, Case 9, closed. Case 10, the one that begins with a confession nobody asked for, is already on her desk.